One missile, one compound, one catastrophic mistake that just pulled a nuclear-armed state into the most dangerous war the Middle East has ever seen. And here is the part nobody is telling you. Under international law, what that missile hit was not Iran, it was North Korea. And Kim Jong-un, the most unpredictable leader on the planet, woke up to that reality within minutes. So ask yourself this: what does a nuclear-armed dictator do when his sovereign territory gets hit by a missile? Does he send a letter? Does he call the United Nations? Or does he do exactly what every analyst who has ever studied him knows he will do? Something far more dangerous than anyone predicted. Stay with me, because what happened in Tehran in the last 48 hours did not just change this war, it may have just changed the world. Here is the conflict pair you need to understand before we go any further. On one side, Israel and the United States, conducting the most intensive aerial bombing campaign since the Gulf War, operating on the assumption that precision technology and overwhelming firepower could contain this conflict within manageable boundaries. On the other side, Kim Jong-un, a man who possesses between 45 and 60 nuclear warheads, who has spent his entire career proving that every red line the world draws exists only to be crossed, and who just received a message from Jerusalem that he did not ask for and will not ignore. This is the story of how one targeting error just turned a two-party conflict into something that has no modern playbook. Start with what actually happened. A missile fired during Operation Epic Fury struck a diplomatic compound in the heart of Tehran, but this was not an Iranian facility, according to 3 Western intelligence sources who spoke on condition of anonymity. This was a North Korean operational hub, a building where North Korean military advisors, Russian intermediaries, and IRGC commanders were coordinating the next phase of a weapons transfer pipeline that has been running for over 2 years. The building is gone, the personnel inside are unaccounted for, and the silence from Pyongyang that followed was not the silence of shock, it was the silence of calculation. Now here is the legal reality that every foreign ministry on earth was scrambling to process within hours of the strike. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, signed in 1961, ratified by virtually every nation on earth, is unambiguous. Diplomatic premises are inviolable. Any strike that damages a diplomatic compound, regardless of whether it was intentional, constitutes a violation of the sovereignty of the nation that compound represents. In plain terms, the missile that struck that building in Tehran did not hit Iranian soil. Under international law, it hit North Korea, and that single legal fact hands Kim Jong-un something no missile or drone could give him. It hands him legitimacy. Think about what that means, because this is the part that should make every person watching this lean forward in their seat. North Korea can now frame any escalation of its support for Iran, any weapons transfer, any deployment of technical personnel, any military cooperation that crosses the line from supplier to participant, not as aggression but as legally justified self-defense, not as destabilization but as a principled response to a documented violation of international law. China will not condemn it. Russia will not condemn it. The global South, already watching Operation Epic Fury with profound unease, will find it extremely difficult to argue against Pyongyang's position, and Kim Jong-un knows this. He has been waiting for exactly this kind of moment for years. Now understand what was actually happening inside that compound before the missile landed, because the Iran-North Korea relationship was not the casual arms trade that most headlines describe. For years, quietly, deliberately, and far from mainstream news coverage, Pyongyang and Tehran had been building one of the most consequential covert military partnerships operating outside Western oversight. North Korea was supplying artillery shells in volumes that Iran's domestic production could not match, hundreds of thousands of rounds flowing into Iranian stockpiles and proxy networks across Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. Ballistic missile guidance components moved through intermediary networks that Western intelligence tracked with growing alarm but could not fully disrupt. Technical advisors, weapons engineers, electronic warfare specialists, and systems analysts traveled between the two countries with a regularity that pointed to something far deeper than a business transaction. What made this partnership particularly dangerous was its depth of technical integration. North Korean engineers were not simply selling finished weapons, they were embedding themselves inside Iranian military research programs, sharing manufacturing processes, reverse engineering Western technology that Iran had acquired through sanctions-busting networks, and building a knowledge transfer architecture that would allow Iran to produce increasingly sophisticated weapons domestically even if the supply chain was eventually cut. This is not a partnership that ends when one shipment is interdicted. This is a partnership that has been building institutional capacity inside the Iranian military for years. What existed between North Korea and Iran by the time Operation Epic Fury was authorized was a functioning military alliance in everything but formal name. And now that alliance has a new dimension because Kim Jong-un is no longer just a weapon supplier who got caught in someone else's crossfire. He is a head of state whose internationally protected sovereign territory was struck without authorization, without congressional approval, and without an exit strategy. But what does Kim Jong-un actually do next? This is the question that has intelligence agencies across 4 continents working through the night. And the answer is not simple, because he has options, and every single one of them is dangerous. Before we get to those options, you need to understand exactly what kind of military capability Kim Jong-un is sitting on, because the numbers are not abstract, they are the foundation of every calculation happening in every briefing room tonight. North Korea possesses between 45 and 60 nuclear warheads by current intelligence estimates, and that number has grown every year for the past decade with no sign of slowing. It has successfully tested the Hwasong-17, its most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile, which has a demonstrated range exceeding 15,000 kilometers. Los Angeles is within reach. Chicago is within reach. New York is within reach. It has deployed hypersonic glide vehicles that travel at speeds exceeding Mach 10 and maneuver unpredictably during their terminal descent phase, specifically engineered to defeat the terminal high-altitude area defense systems that the United States has positioned across the Pacific. It has miniaturized nuclear warheads to a size compatible with ballistic missile delivery, according to a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment that was leaked 3 years ago and never officially denied. And Kim Jong-un has demonstrated, repeatedly and without exception, that he treats every red line drawn by the international community as a coordinate to aim at rather than a boundary to respect. He does the thing analysts say he will not do. He goes further than the threshold everyone agreed was the absolute limit. He does it at the exact moment the world is most distracted and least prepared to respond. The world right now is maximally distracted. The United States is running the most intensive air campaign in the Middle East in over 3 decades. Oil is above $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively blockaded. A KC-135 tanker went down over western Iraq days ago, killing 6 American airmen. American Patriot missile defense batteries have been depleted across multiple theaters by weeks of relentless Iranian drone and missile attacks. THAAD systems are being repositioned under conditions that have left critical coverage gaps in the Indo-Pacific. Into all of that accumulated stress, Kim Jong-un has just been handed a legal justification for escalation that the international community cannot easily dismiss. The most restrained option available to him is political. North Korea condemns the strike, suspends diplomatic engagement with Washington, and uses the legal violation to reframe itself on the world stage as a victim of American military overreach rather than an aggressor state. This costs nothing militarily and generates enormous diplomatic capital, particularly in Beijing and Moscow, where the narrative of American unilateralism already resonates at the highest levels of government. But Kim Jong-un has never been known for choosing the restrained option when a more consequential one is available. And the second option is where serious analysts are focusing their attention. Pyongyang quietly and dramatically accelerates its existing weapons transfer architecture with Tehran, not with a press conference, not with a public announcement, but through the same shadow networks that have been operating for years. More advanced missile guidance systems, more sophisticated electronic warfare packages, more technical personnel embedded directly inside Iranian military operations, in ways that are functionally impossible to publicly attribute and diplomatically impossible to sanction under the current international framework. If this happens, and most analysts who have spent serious time studying North Korean decision-making consider it the most probable near-term trajectory, Iran's military capability improves materially at the exact moment when American air defense resources are most depleted. The threat profile facing every oil terminal, every military base, and every civilian population center across the Gulf escalates to a level that existing protection systems were never designed to absorb simultaneously. And then there is the third option, the one no official will discuss on camera. The one that every serious risk assessment team in every major capital is modeling quietly in background documents that will never be declassified. Direct escalation. North Korea crossing the line from covert supporter to active participant in a way that cannot be managed through diplomatic language or plausible deniability. 2 nuclear-armed states in direct or indirect confrontation with the world's most powerful military simultaneously, with an American force already stretched, already depleted, already operating without the congressional mandate that would give it the domestic political foundation to sustain a genuinely expanded conflict. Could this actually happen? 6 weeks ago, every analyst would have said the probability was negligible. Tonight, it is no longer negligible, and the gap between negligible and real is exactly the space where history's worst miscalculations live. Seoul understood the stakes immediately. The South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff ordered a review of alert postures across the peninsula. Within 90 minutes of the compound strike becoming public, that bureaucratic language is how governments announce genuine fear without saying the word fear. South Korea's 52 million people live within artillery range of the North Korean border. Seoul, a city of 10 million, sits 35 miles from the demilitarized zone. North Korean artillery can reach the South Korean capital in under 3 minutes. Every escalation on the Korean Peninsula lands differently when you hold those numbers in your head. Japan convened an emergency National Security Council session within 2 hours. Tokyo understands better than any city on earth what North Korean escalation means in physical terms. Japan sits between the Korean Peninsula and the open Pacific with no geographic buffer and no strategic depth. The Sea of Japan is not an abstract concept for Japanese exporters and energy importers. It is the corridor through which the supplies keeping 125 million people alive must pass, and it is also the body of water into which North Korean ballistic missiles have been fired during previous escalation cycles while the world watched and issued condemnations that changed nothing. And why is China staying silent? This is the question that should alarm everyone watching this unfold. Beijing has more leverage over Pyongyang than any other government on earth. China supplies the fuel, the food, and the financial infrastructure that keeps North Korea functioning as a state. When China wants to restrain Kim Jong-un, it has tools no other nation possesses. China's decision not to use those tools, not to issue a strong public statement urging restraint, not to signal privately that escalation carries consequences is itself a strategic decision. Every American carrier group committed to the Persian Gulf is a carrier group unavailable for the Taiwan Strait. Every Patriot battery depleted defending Gulf infrastructure is a battery not protecting the Indo-Pacific. Every defense dollar spent on Middle Eastern emergency procurement is a dollar not invested in the capabilities that would matter most in a Pacific confrontation. Beijing is watching the United States stretch itself across simultaneous crises and has calculated that this is not the moment to apply the brake. Russia is making the same calculation from a different angle. Moscow's relationship with Pyongyang has deepened dramatically over 3 years. 17 bilateral military delegations, Russian technical advisors documented inside North Korean weapons development facilities. Kim Jong-un's personal visit to Moscow where he was shown Russian defense infrastructure no foreign leader had accessed in over 3 decades. Putin understands what North Korea's escalation options look like better than almost anyone outside Pyongyang. His decision to limit Russia's public response to carefully worded calls for restraint is not neutrality. It is a choice. And that choice tells you that Moscow is not working to close Kim Jong-un's decision window. It is watching to see what emerges from it. The economic consequences reached global markets before the diplomatic cables had finished processing what happened. Gulf equity indices fell at a speed that reflected the simultaneous recognition across trading floors from Dubai to Singapore to Frankfurt that the risk model everyone had been using had just become obsolete. The Iran conflict until that moment had been terrible and disruptive but contained. North Korea's entry into the equation, even at the level of potential escalation, removed the containment assumption entirely. Brent crude moved above $103 a barrel. Lloyd's of London underwriting sources describe conditions in insurance pricing rooms as something not experienced since the weeks immediately after September 2001, not panic, but a specific focused dread that precedes the repricing of everything. Container shipping rates climbed again. Defense sector equities moved sharply as institutional investors began pricing in a procurement emergency requiring congressional authorization and production timelines. The current defense industrial base cannot meet at the required speed. For the oil workers at Ras Tanura, the world's largest offshore loading facility in Saudi Arabia, for the sailors navigating the Strait of Hormuz, for the engineers maintaining Kuwait's power grid that has already absorbed debris from intercepted missiles. Multiple times in 2 weeks, this is not a geopolitical abstraction. It is the question they ask every morning before they leave for work. Will the infrastructure still be standing when my shift begins? The statement that emerged from North Korean state media in the hours after the compound strike was brief and precisely calibrated. Pyongyang condemned the attack as an illegal act of aggression and a direct violation of national sovereignty. Kim Jong-un was personally monitoring the situation. He would take necessary measures at the necessary time. Necessary measures at the necessary time. Analysts who have spent careers reading North Korean state language did not sleep after those words were published, because in Pyongyang's specific diplomatic vocabulary, that phrase does not mean a strongly worded letter to the Security Council. T means a decision has already been made. The calculation is complete. The only remaining variable is timing. One missile struck a compound in Tehran. Under international law, it struck North Korea. And somewhere in the quiet that follows the kind of decision that changes the direction of history, Kim Jong-un is not composing a diplomatic response. He is deciding what comes next. And what comes next will determine whether this war finds a boundary it cannot cross, or discovers that every boundary it assumed was permanent has already disappeared. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next 72 hours will reveal whether back-channel pressure can close the window that one missile accidentally opened, or whether the silence from Pyongyang is about to end in a way that no press briefing, no Pentagon statement, and no emergency Security Council session is prepared to contain. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Kim Jong-un treats this as an accident and limits his response to political condemnation? Or does the logic of his own survival make escalation not just possible but inevitable?